Okay, so this is part 4 of the origins of the Santa Cruz Batman. This one, it gets difficult this late in the story because I'm getting closer and closer to present day professional life. And doing homeless advocacy and being a high-tech professional, the higher you go, the dichotomy between those two worlds becomes a challenge. And so around 2001, right, when I'd had my hand injury, it was just time to make a career change. And at that time, I started a new relationship with who was a famous feminist author out of Kentucky. If you're good at Googling, you could probably figure out who it is. But this started my education of what life was like in the United States, outside of the Pacific Northwest, where I was raised and had spent all my life up to that point. This new position, I took a new job in the Detroit area, specifically Ann Arbor. But I didn't live in Ann Arbor. I lived in the outskirts, trying to save money in Ypsilanti. And Ypsilanti, if you don't know it, is an old Ford factory town. It used to be out in the rural area. Detroit is a really interesting place in the United States. If you didn't realize it, Detroit was the 4th largest city in the United States up until the mid-'60s, when there were a series of riots over 2 different years, pretty serious riots that actually involved National Guard showing up and shooting at U.S. citizens. And so Detroit and the motor industry in general is a magnet for those seeking reasonable wages and employment from all across the Midwest and the South. And so Detroit is kind of a melting pot of your Appalachian, and it's pronounced Appalachia, not Appalachian mountains. And so being married to someone from Kentucky, you find out a completely different set of values that you may have been raised with. And it became interesting to understand how people from Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, and of course Michigan and around, migrated up to the Detroit area to work in the factories for decent wages. And so in that community, the values are strongly influenced a lot by Southern culture and Appalachia. And what I discovered over the 8 years that I was in the Detroit area, and I did homeless advocacy in that area, was that Appalachian values and are very similar to, they're kind of universal to the way homeless communities are organized, as far as the protocol between human beings, what's right, what's wrong. It's kind of basic common law. I think everyone would agree with the basic rules of how to behave in a society, friends, neighbors, do the right thing. But it was really interesting to see this cultural blend that I'd never been exposed to in the Pacific Northwest, which is, higher than average Black Americans from Deep South, higher than average Appalachian people from Kentucky, Tennessee, and they were pretty smart people. And whatever you'd been brainwashed or taught in being in Pacific Northwest all your life got quickly washed away. And when you're married into an actual family of Kentucky or Tennessee, you start to actually get access to what they call the hollers. And some people had no running water, literally no running water. And so it is a slice of America that is precious, interesting. But if you're a homeless advocacy, it seemed to be one and the same. The values of how you hold up for your neighbors, the protocol for dealing with social problems without getting, government involved, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's chapter 4, is my experience in finally leaving my hometown of Beaverton, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, for 40 plus years and moving to Michigan, but then spending almost every other weekend traveling to Kentucky, Tennessee, driving through the Ohio Valley, seeing the Rust Belt, seeing the people and the generations that had been riding the wave of one of the most profitable and really arsenal democracy. The Detroit area is largely responsible for winning World War II. There's a lot of smart people, a lot of hardworking people, but it's a melting pot of societies from Deep South, Appalachia, defense industry, big capital money, Ford Motor Company, General Motors and whatnot. And it's right there on the Canadian border. And so it is America. Michigan is probably one of the most American states there is in the United States. There's not enough mountains, and it's a little flat, and it's a little cold for a boy from Pacific Northwest. But in those 8 years, those values of the people that you interface with on a day-to-day basis, Appalachian values, Deep South values, I found a large overlap with the homeless community. And there, homelessness is a pretty serious business, because for at least 2, maybe 3 months out of the year, if you don't have some arrangements to get indoors, you're going to be dead, because it does occasionally get down to minus 10 degrees. For long stretches, it's down in the 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's almost impossible to build a shelter that can withstand those winters. So the homeless there have to have some sort of symbiotic relationship with the community and others, so that for a fraction of the year, they're in shelter. Otherwise, you're not going to survive even one season. So that was like an 8-year-long education as I worked some of the homeless camps there. Very different than being homeless in Southern California, clearly, even all the way up to Portland, Oregon, where the climate is fairly moderate. And if possible, you can actually live year-round outside if you know how to build a decent shelter for some of the harder months. But in some of these areas in the Midwest, especially up north, as you get closer to Canada, it's really impossible to be truly homeless. You got to have shelter. And so that was my education for 8 years, and finally leaving the mothership of the Pacific Northwest and discovering what a significant part of the country, Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, Michigan, are really like. And what you discover is human beings are amazing. Anywhere you go, there's a charm to it. They're amazing. And you start assimilating your values with theirs. But you have to balance that with everything else you've learned up to that point. Some people never leave their hometown and never get out of their comfort zone of the society that they're currently in or were raised in. And so I tell people, if you're fortunate enough to move around at least once or twice, get a long ways away in a different culture. If you're adaptable, you'll find that the values that translate across those societies are very common to the self-governance that you find in advanced homeless camps. And so that's chapter 4. At the end of the 8 years, I moved to California. And there began my direct experience in Silicon Valley. Even though I'd been working with Silicon Valley for over a decade plus, to actually be immersed in it, to go from the Rust Belt, Appalachia, Kentucky, Tennessee kinds of societies to Silicon Valley is yet another gear shift. And so seeing in a short amount of time, as far as a lifetime span is concerned, of these different cultures is healthy in giving you perspective about how diverse and resilient the United States is. And you gain a lot of respect for different cultures and different economies across this country where everyone seems to find a way to survive. It's America. But some of the values that, stick with you are the ones from these poorer communities. And if I had not moved to the Detroit area and actually experienced it firsthand, I probably would not have been sold on the value and the not the uniqueness, but the ubiquitous values that run throughout that region and are kind of common to what you kind of naturally boil down to if you are stripped of everything and you have to become homeless. So I don't recommend you necessarily leave your hometown, and I had a lot of regrets about leaving Oregon. But the people you meet when you make a life change like that will give you a perspective that, in hindsight, you wouldn't change a thing. You'd do it over again because you don't want to be blind to that experience going forward, seeing everything that you see these days in the economy, the struggles with people. If you are in a good place in the United States, you probably have a warped opinion about how things really are. So to truly be a homeless advocate, I think it's necessary for you to definitely move around the country and experience wealthy economies, the worst economies, different kinds of value systems between East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, Deep South, up near the Canadian border. It's all America. And although they each have their kind of uniqueness to them, there's a core common value set that I think we all kind of understood 200 years ago. But in modern society, it's easily kind of overlooked in the chase for bigger house, faster boat, better degree, more malls, more regulations. So maybe I'll wrap up. So that's my part 4. Part 5 may take a while because it's getting closer and closer to present day, and that balance between professional life and your philanthropic life. And so part 5 will probably be California. Got to do what a man's got to do, which is try the chili.
Oh my God, it's beautiful out. Look at these mountains.